So now, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Rob to present your case, probably from the Canada point of view. Please. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Eric Baradine, and of course, Dr. Tariq for inviting me here today. Really honored to come back here. We actually met at one of the knowledge fairs in Bacalalan. Sorry, yeah, before COVID. So yeah, it was amazing experience. And I think we sat at a table, drank coffee, and talked for 3 hours or something about policy around broadband. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And got a chance to meet Professor Nora and others from Unimass and Roger Harris and so on. So yeah, great to be here. So I will be talking about some work happening in Canada now. I'm just one member of a group of people working on this. I'm not an Indigenous person. I'm a settler scholar working with colleagues at the university and also in the communities we work with in Northern Canada. So really honored to come here and present on behalf of our group. And one thing that our colleagues came up with actually is this idea of capacity sharing. So I just wanted to stress this here, and hearing a lot today about sort of those interactions and knowledge exchange happening. It's not so much capacity building, it's around sharing capacity between communities and academic researchers and policymakers and so on. So I'll start just with some photos from Northern Canada. So you can see there, this is Hudson Bay. This is in the eastern part of the country. And that's Quebec. And there's a tiny community up there named Ivuyavik, which is in the Nunavik region. It's the Inuit region of northern Quebec. And the town there is Ivuyavik. It's a few hundred people. Sounds somewhat similar, fly-in community. So it's one of 14 within the region that are governed by an Inuit government. So there's no roads or anything there. And it's Ivuyavik, the name, is Inuktitut for the place where ice accumulates. So you can see the icebergs. And at different times in the day, when the tide comes in, they all come there and it turns to ice and then it breaks up and leaves. So a lot of change there in terms of the ice and also, of course, the technology. But of course, infrastructure in Canada. So as I mentioned, transportation, there's not year-round roads. There's maybe winter roads. Sometimes a barge will come in and deliver supplies, or it's by plane. Electricity is also a challenge. So I think similar to what we've been hearing today with diesel generators and so on. And then telecommunications. Which I'll talk more about today. And we talk about this place as the Canadian Tire. It's kind of like a Walmart. People joke about the name there, but this is like places where people go for spare parts. So those are skidoos. So they use those to travel on the ice. And they're very well organized, and you can go there and get parts if your machine breaks down. But at the same time, this is long before COVID, and people were already innovating and using digital technologies in different ways. So we can see here an old video conferencing unit. That's a nursing station there. There's at the school, they had smart boards, and then people were doing graphic design and other computer work from their homes. That was happening within the community, but across Canada, we're seeing significant availability and access challenges among many regions. So this is from 2019, and you can see there, the purple square on the right is 3 northern territories, and they actually aren't even showing on the map, according to the basic service objective standard, which is 50 megabits per second download and 10 upload. So this is back in 2017. You can also see the Indigenous areas are the bars on the right side. So you can see there's also a significant gap there. So not just in the north, but also in the provinces. What does it look like now? This is the most recent statistics. These are from the Canadian Telecommunications Regulator. Still, we're seeing big gaps in First Nations reserves areas and the north. How about cost, affordability? You can see here, this is, again, the purple area is in the 3 northern regions, and the most expensive prices in Canada are on the far right. That's $111 a month for services. So they're not only some of the slowest, but also some of the most expensive. with much of that because of data caps. So the more data you use, including for household services, the more you have to pay. How does it look now in 2021? This is Alberta on the left. You can see an average of about $80 a month. And then in the north, almost double at $150. So we're still facing significant digital inclusion challenges. With respect to community access centers, there's so few in the north that they actually had to put that together with all of the Atlantic provinces, and it's still only 2% of the total amount. So there's not too many options for community access centers either. But at the same time, these types of models where the focus, I think, in the regulator and so on is around the gaps, so that deficiency of access and availability and affordability. And these are structural challenges, but we're also seeing innovations happening throughout the communities. And it's so wonderful to hear from our colleagues here too about that amazing work. So at the local level is really where I'm going to be focusing on today. So this idea of community-based digital inclusion research, so identifying and utilizing community resources and expertise. So, I think this is common to everybody in the room here, right? Working together with community co-researchers, co-presenting, doing publications together and so on. Sharing the benefits of research through things like stories, public outreach, or even using it for policy and regulatory interventions. And then also creating and sharing resources like toolkits and workshops and so on, such as what our colleagues have presented on earlier today with some of those workshops. So I'll just give a short example in Northern Canada here. So the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, which is our federal regulator of all telecom services, right now, as we speak, they're actually looking at the issue of access, affordability, and availability in the north. And they said, we want to know more about how the telecommunication needs of Canadians living in the areas serviced by Northwest Tel, that's the main incumbent provider in Northern Canada. Are they being met? And what do people think about the quality of their telecom services? So are they accessible? Are they affordable? Are they reliable? So they had the first phase of their consultations, and they've just recently opened up a second phase. And when I say consultations, they open it up to public input. So they post a letter of notice on their website, and then people can fill out information there by sending it to them by email or on the website, or they can file comments. So there were some challenges with that consultation process, right? So people had to fill out their personal information, their name, their address, and so on. So there was some concern there. As well, just reaching people in the remote communities. It's really ironic because the whole policy is designed to support people in these remote northern communities, but many of them were not even aware it was going on, right? And then that was the first part of it. The second part of it was how do you actually translate the conditions on the ground that they're experiencing? Our colleagues earlier today spoke about the lived experiences into this policy format. So this is where some of the colleagues working in the communities had some suggestions for ideas, right? So one of them being community-based internet performance mapping. And I know Dr. Tariq's got a project similar to this, whereby it's user-generated information about the quality of experience that people are actually experiencing the internet. So people can run an internet test. They go to a website, they click a button, and then it takes that information and plots it out using GIS on a map. And so there you can compare different communities or different regions and so on. So we launched a bit of a contest there and said, okay, run this test, and then you can sign up for this contest and you can win an iPad or take a photo of it and put it on social media. So we wanted to generate interest on social media with a hashtag there. And then we held some online workshops. Now, right away, I can tell you there were some challenges there, right? Because it's very graphic heavy. So you're kind of reaching the people who are still have the best service, right? So we had to take a look again at that system and generate a low bandwidth version. So people would just go and click a very basic button and they wouldn't be able to see the map, but we could still collect the data. And then we also made sure that there was ways to participate in workshops with phone lines, right? Or community radio is still very popular. So trying to broadcast information on those types of media as well. Another thing we did was worked with people in the communities to collect data from their home communities. So they know their communities best. They already have the relationships. How can we support them as researchers by developing tools that they can use to collect that information? So we use a free open source app called Open Data Kit, and it works on an Android platform. And we would preload it onto a tablet, put together a kit. You can see it on the left there with some posters they could put up around town, information to read out on community media. And then at the back end, we set up a workflow process. So it would send data that they collected off. So they would collect it offline on the tablet. It'd go back to a Wi-Fi point in the community and then upload that. And then we would have access to those results from our end. So that allowed us to kind of have all these people in different communities collecting the data, feed it back to us, and then we could then like analyze that for the policymakers. We also learned that mobile phone was quite popular. So we also did a text message survey. So people could just text a short code to do a survey. Of course, that was limited to people who had cell phones, but it was also another way to gather information there from those folks. That was using a really low-cost tool called Twilio. So if anybody's interested in that tool as well, I could share information on that. So here's some of the data we collected through these methods. So in total, we did 14 communities, 10 in the first year, 12 in the second. And then in terms of the number of households, roughly just under 500 over the 2 years. And then just over 300 of the text message surveys. And what did we learn, right? So we asked people, one of the questions was, do you have internet in your home? So you can see here, a little more than a third of people did not have internet in their home. So we went door to door in order to collect information from people who didn't have access to the internet, may not have a cell phone, and so on. So we felt it was really important to have that face-to-face contact with folks. And then we asked them, well, if you don't have internet, why is that? And you can see there more than half said it was too expensive or not affordable. So this was a really big finding for us. So this is, determining which element of digital inclusion was a challenge in this context. You can see there also some people were not interested, some people didn't have the availability, some people use a mobile phone and so on. Okay, so for the second part of this presentation, I'll talk about how that's the research piece, and then how is that actually taken and then presented into policymakers such as the CRTC, the regulator. So this is a photo from 2016 public hearings that focused on that basic service objective that I talked about. So this kind of started off with a lot of information coming in about Indigenous community networks. So there was a lot of information coming in from different parts of Canada about these amazing local projects that were taking place. So for example, in the southern part of the Northwest Territories, in the town of, near the town of Hay River, the First Nation of Katladeche First Nation, they did a fiber optic bill. So you can see here, this is the trenching that they were doing. It was pretty cold. It was so cold it actually broke the shovel on the back of the trenching device there, so they had to wait another year to get the part and then continue trenching. So, yeah, it's like cement. This is up in Uluhuktuk, which is actually a project supported by the Internet Society, and the young lady there, Sidonia Okina, was generating interest for a local internet service provider there that would use a satellite connection to link into the community. So all of these individual projects happening across Canada were often connected to regional community intermediary organizations. So typically these groups operate in a provincial or kind of large regional area, and they're aggregates of these community networks. So First Nations in Canada have governance and administration over public services like healthcare, education, and so on. And so these regional organizations are the technology components of that. So the First Nations governments had established these to help with support like the delivery of public services through IT services. Okay. And then over time, these different regional entities interconnected into a national association. But going back to the roles of these regional organizations, so what do they do, right? So they'll advocate for and administer digital services on behalf of their member communities. They represent and are governed by groups of local communities, and that allows access to services and economies of scale and so on. They use digital technologies to deliver services, and then they act as mediators between the communities and entities like governments or corporations or so on. So a group of these regional organizations got together and formed this First Mile Connectivity Consortium. So we heard earlier today that concept of flipping the last mile to the first mile, kind of not considering the communities at the end of the road as the last part of the connection, but trying to bring that decision-making process and infrastructure deployment process to start at the community level and extend out from there. So this organization is it's a national nonprofit. It has a volunteer board of directors that's made up of those regional organizations, and then it receives any funding from contracts, research, foundations, and so on. So it's separate from the government. And it works for equitable, affordable, appropriate broadband for members of rural, remote First Nations. So we have some more information about the association itself on these printouts. So if you'd like to learn any more about that, including the way that the organization prepares and submits consultations, or some of the key principles that all the member organizations have to sign on to, it's available there. This is very similar to a lot of what we've heard from other colleagues at the event today, but just this theory of change whereby digital networks being designed and built with the region or community needs as the starting point supports that regional and local ownership and control of the infrastructure, helps with the sustainability piece, so the operating costs get covered by anchor tenants, such as healthcare providers or education providers. And then that generates a bit of an economy to support local support staff, community jobs and training. And then the idea being that that leads out to sustainable technologies to meet regional and community needs. Another kind of set of principles that helps kind of conceptualize the work is this idea of the geographic paradox of telecommunications development. So if you think about it, right, and this really became clear during COVID, in urban communities, you can go down the store, you can visit, go down the street, you can visit a store, you can go to school in a brick and mortar classroom and so on. So you have the best transportation links, you have, typically like the most available in-person services. And you also typically have, the highest quality digital infrastructure, the lowest costs, and so on. So there's arguably a lower need because in more remote communities, because there isn't that brick and mortar service available, you rely on the connectivity to access that. So we heard that from our colleagues, like with those examples around education and so on, that people were doing that online. So there's that higher need, but at the same time, it's less available and less affordable. Another kind of orientation, and this again echoes a lot of what we're hearing from colleagues here, is that e-community perspective. So you're looking at the different ways that connectivity can support different public services and so on. So this is how it's framed in the Canadian context. Another piece is, well, if you're looking at the adoption of digital technology, I think oftentimes the orientation is around household or individual connectivity. So policymakers are looking to measure the number of individuals or households connected in a specific geographic area. But this is kind of placing that within that larger framework, which also considers community services, businesses, and organizations. And then at that regional level, the regional backhaul, which is, in the case of Canada, sometimes offered by Indigenous digital transport infrastructure providers, and then that environmental piece of the surrounding lands, waters, and space. So just to end my presentation here, some of the key policy proposals that are animating some of the First Mile Group's work. there's more information in the handout, but just really briefly, reviewing existing mechanisms for funding. So is the funding appropriate? And then is there set asides for nonprofit Indigenous providers? So in those areas that don't support that commercial model, the market areas of so-called market failure, is there special funding set aside for that? Supporting infrastructure development that ensures equity, adaptability, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. This idea of program metrics of success should meet community needs. Supporting those regional intermediary organizations that provide technical expertise to upgrade, operate, and maintain the infrastructure. Supporting Indigenous engagement in policy and regulatory decision-making. Ensuring every community has local technical support available. And then finally, supporting efforts to produce content in Indigenous languages. So this is just some information. There's two websites there. One is the First Mile Group and another one which is more on those surveys that I talked about and so on, and some digital literacy materials is at digitalnwt.ca. And thank you so much for listening today and for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Dr. Rob. I think perhaps one day we should visit your remote place in Canada, since you have been visiting our place here in. So that's Dr. Gerard place, so this area. Okay, I think any quick question to the three speakers before we take a break? Anybody want to ask any quick questions? Yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm just interested in the e-barrio community radio. Right now, what kind of information does it broadcast to the communities in the area? Is it basically in terms of farming information, social network, etc.?
Of course, it's primarily information which is relevant to community, like events. And of course, if there are some programs for community conducted by the government or by some NGOs, and it's more of those kind of information. And in between, they have some music to fill in the gaps. And sometimes they've got talks, people who come in to give talks about certain matters or certain things of interest to the community. So like researchers, if they come in, they want to give a talk to say what they are going to do, what are they doing in the community, they can use the radio barrier. Yeah.
Was there any kind of assessment in terms of what is the community's response to the programs or information that's been shared?
I'm not sure whether there's any official survey done in terms of how many people do. You've done, okay, Dr. Tariq.
There's initially in 2013, a paper has been written by UNIMAS. They have done the study, the impacts, and also they use the business opportunity which is created by the radio, by the school of from UNIMAS, the School of Language and Communication Studies. It is presented in Cheetah conference. The short on that.
Any other question? The penetration of internet in Canada.
Sorry, the definition?
No, the penetration.
Yeah, it's very. Here, can I bring up that slide again? I can show you across the different regions of Canada. But it really varies. But the vast majority is in the south. If you look at the land in Canada, the vast majority of the population is in small band, about 200 kilometers from the U.S. border, and that's where the majority of that is. But if you look, I'll show a map of Canada too. Okay, so if we look at that map. Across the US border is where the majority of your connectivity is. And then you have small rural, remote northern indigenous communities throughout the rest of Canada, but there's still gaps between the communities. So you have like significant availability issues there along roads. So you won't be able to get a cell phone call and so on. And then within those communities, there's still gaps there as well. So when the regulator is trying to measure availability, this is the most recent report. So you can see there, only 44% of the north is meeting that standard. And in First Nations communities, which are not just in the north, they're also in the southern parts. So we actually have a divide in Canada in the south between Indigenous and non-Indigenous areas. So a fiber optic cable might be running right beside the community is not able to access that. So 39%. What's that?
Some of the areas from the electricity is far, but the company doesn't have the electricity.
Okay, any last questions to the speakers? Yeah. Okay, so before we take a break, thank you again to all the three speakers. Thank you very much. Before I leave this the first part of the session, maybe I just like to request from our two politicians, maybe when the state government come up with a new policy for like IT for rural communities, perhaps it's good to engage or bring in. I think sometimes maybe the officer they only talk among themselves. I think they should bring the people from the community, the practitioner, the researcher come together, and I think that's why we try to organize this dialogue so that we can pass the message to the government. For example, this morning we're talking about the statistics about the connectivity for Sarawak, for instance. So, but people keep on talking about the number of towers, but that's not reflect to the rural area. They don't care about towers. What they want is connectivity. It doesn't matter how you use its connectivity. Sometimes you have the towers, but there's no connectivity. So I think that's kind of concept understanding. I mean, and then at the end of the day, is the measurement is not about whether every village have connection, but actually how the services being used, improve their livelihood. That's the measure. Yeah, I think that's the kind of the policy lah. We hope that we can bring forward to the.
As you said, building the towers may solve the problem, but sometimes it creates a problem because once you don't have the telcos installing the equipment there, it becomes a constant reminder. This tower is not doing anything. So, I mean, if you're not prepared, the telcos are not prepared to install the communication equipment there, then I think we can forget about building the towers because it will create the expectation.
The number stealing they will cut the steel. Tower percent.
That's of course one of the challenges here in the remote areas. The telcos always say that the design is always a constant risk for them.
Okay.
The engagement with the public policy, particularly the budget, state budget, is very important. Otherwise, we might not have the focus to the area and one area. For example, tower can be good, but in terms of capacity building in the community, they might not benefit at all.
So that's the reason why I bring the two of you here.
Because the community has to be involved. Because sometimes certain things need to be done in a certain way to suit them. I've always, even in my own constituency, told implementing agencies, Bro, you are building it for the people. So you must listen to what is it that you want. You might think this is the best thing that you want to build there, but they may not say it has to be a bit different. So in terms of like now building roads, the part of the Pemborneo, Sabang link road, and then the
you have to talk to the community in terms of where should the road come into the house or the village, you know. For you engineers, you say, oh, the road, no, it should be from here. But then you go and talk to the community, you say, no, it should approach from the other side.
Yeah.
Simple things, location of facilities in the village as well, you know. Because if you don't consult, you don't engage with the community, they will just say, oh, this is government project, nothing to do with us. No sense of belonging, appreciation, you know. So that's why it is very important.
Yeah, very important.
I agree with Prof.
Okay, so thank you very much to the two speakers again for your participation. We'll take a break. Yes.
Yeah.